going to read from this intro, so don't miss any points, because Kate O'Neill is a really, really special person. She's a digital innovator, chief executive, business writer, and a globally recognized speaker known as the tech humanist. She's the founder and CEO of KO Insights, a strategic advisory firm that enhances human experiences at scale through data-driven and AI-led experiences and interactions. And she's worked with prestigious clients like Google, IBM, Microsoft, and the United Nations. She was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix and watched Netflix grow. Over the years, her groundbreaking insights have been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Wired. She's shared her expertise on NPR and the BBC. She's been honored with numerous awards, including Technology Entrepreneur of the Year, and a spot on Thinker's 50 list of the world's management thinkers to watch. With 6 influential books under her belt, including Tech Humanist and The Future So Bright, as well as her latest book, which is fresh off the press here, What Matters Next. She's here to enlighten us and inspire us about navigating the future. And I have to say, knowing Kate for the past several years and having her come to speak to several of my classes, this intro doesn't do her justice. So you will be really amazed. So let's give Kate a big welcome.
Thank you. It's so wonderful. Thank you, Youngmi. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Or is it here? This is our camera, right? Okay. Hi, friends. Nice to see you. Hello, humans, one and all. Whether you're on the camera or here in person, I'm glad to see humans in the room. I am so excited to talk with you. I always have a great time talking with the classes that I get to come and meet. I want to make sure that this is a valuable session for you, that you get a lot out of it. So what I think will be the most valuable is for me to do a little bit of a presentation first, just to kind of set the tone and give you some of the framework and vocabulary and some of what I want us to think about. And then we'll go into a facilitated session where Youngmi will sit with me here, ask me some questions, and she'll facilitate your questions as well, so that you can certainly participate in the conversation. I don't know if we have a way for the Zoom participants to engage yet. We do. Okay, so Zoom participants, I hope you will and add your questions and comments as well. I also just want to echo this concentrations emphasis. My concentration in school was international studies, and that has become increasingly important in my work as time has gone on. So you never know what is going to be useful to you later on in life. Oh, please come on through. Don't worry about it. Just come on through. So we were talking about the world feeling like it's kind of moving too fast. Does anyone feel like the world is moving a little too fast right now? Any hands? Yeah, there's a lot of hands, and people are just kind of going like this. There's kind of a dead blank stare on people's faces. That is the sign, right? How many of you feel also like the future is looking pretty uncertain right now? Does anyone feel that? Yeah, it's relatable. I can understand why that would feel that way. But I think the first thing that's going to help us in order to have a conversation about the future and how we can make it better is to unpack what it is we mean when we're talking about the future. So first of all, I think there's a set of ways we talk about the future that society has given us, that culture and literature have given us, that don't do us a whole lot of good. So what the future isn't is this way that science fiction has characterized it and so on. There's usually only 2 ways that we talk about the future, and that is dystopia or utopia. You got it. Yeah, exactly. So it's dystopia versus utopia is very, very typical. Does anybody recognize that to be true? Like usually when we think about the future, most of the time it's like, oh, this is so dystopian, or oh, it's going to be all so perfect. And we all know that that's not useful. How do we know it's not useful? Because are we living in a dystopia or a utopia right now? Anyone? Does anyone have an answer to that? Like, is it a dystopia? I mean, Sometimes, right? It feels like, is it a utopia? Probably not. And that's the thing, actually, almost everyone in this room will probably agree that utopia is not really on the table, right? No one thinks that we're going to make all the decisions so perfectly and we're going to do everything so well that we're going to be living in an ideal paradise, right? So let's just get that right out of the way, which means that every time we talk about the future, we're just talking about shades of dystopia. We're just saying, oh, that's going to be so bad, or it's going to be so much worse. We're going like, oh, every time we read like about a new breakthrough in science or technology, we're going, great. How bad is this going to be? Right? Like, oh, stem cell research, great. Science has figured out how to. Oh, today what did I see? They figured out how to deal with prions that come from like mad cow disease and all these other kinds of brain tissue diseases that happen from cannibalism. And someone shared that on Threads and was like, "Great day for cannibals." But that, okay, sure, fair enough. But it's not only that, right? As we all understand enough about science and technology to know that the breakthroughs aren't limited to what they're initially thought to be about. And the same is true when it comes to technology and AI. So what I want to do is make sure we get this model completely out of the discussion. Dystopia versus utopia is not a useful framework, and I want to tell you what it is, what the future is instead. Because you're probably going like, but we needed that. Like, no, we don't need that. We need some way to talk about the future, and it needs to be a way that gives us something that we can do what dystopia versus utopia was doing for us, which is dystopia versus utopia was giving us a way to talk about what we fear and what we hope for. Get that? Make sense? Everybody agree?
Yep.
So what we need is a disciplined way to talk about that. Oops, I wasn't supposed to show you that slide yet. A disciplined way to talk about that, where we can identify what our hopes are, what we're optimistic about, and identify what we think the risks are so that we can create really disciplined and strategic frameworks to make sure we don't let those things happen. I call this strategic optimism. So it's not just optimism, it's not just like, hey, everything's gonna be okay. It's strategic optimism. It's like, everything might be okay if we make the right decisions. But the if is really important, and the decisions are really important. So what I say the future is simply this. Everybody wanna take a deep breath? Okay. The future is simply time just in front of us, easy enough, right? And it is at least partly knowable or predictable because it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions that we've already made and taken in the past, plus those we're about to make today. Does that make sense? You want to hear it again? You want to see that slide I wasn't supposed to show you? So the future is the time in front of us, which is at least partly knowable or predictable because it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions that we've already made or taken in the past, as well as, even more importantly, as well as those we're about to make today. How's that feel? Like a little more like you're in control of the situation, just a tiny bit? Not so much like, great, how bad's this gonna be? Well, I think it's really important that we feel a sense of empowerment and a sense of agency about the future, and that doesn't feel all uncertain and all bleak to us. We need to feel like even if everything does feel as if it's changing too fast, we have a way to harness that, almost like ride the tiger into the future. And we need to know how it is that we're doing that. So right now, one of the problems with this sense that everything is changing too fast is it leads to what I think are two extremes of bad decisions. On one hand, what we do is we sacrifice the future for the present. Like we're making very short-term decisions and saying, forget about the future. And on the other hand, we sacrifice the present for the future. We go like, well, I don't care what this is gonna do to us now. Let's like focus on, making these investments into the future that we think are gonna pay off, 100 years from now or something. Where we see this happen is in a lot of what happens within Silicon Valley, where it's like, the race toward accelerationism in technology, like, oh, AI and the moon and Mars and all of these different kinds of advancements are going to save humanity. So we're obligated to that very distant future. We're not obligated to the present. As opposed to what is very easy trap to fall into is this more short-sighted view where we say, I don't want to think about the future. I'm just living for the moment, just doing things that are about now. Can you see how both of those are extremes that would get us kind of nowhere? Like they're the extremes we want to avoid in most of our decision making. I hope that on Zoom you can see that pretty clearly. It's a little bright and faint in here in the room too, but hopefully that's pretty clear. What tends to happen with these, and I'm going to show you this in a couple of different ways so that it makes more sense. But what tends to happen with these is that you end up with, on the one side, on the where you're sacrificing the future for the present, where it's too short-sighted, you end up making what I call harms of inaction. You don't make the decisions that you know you need to make, and then you sit and you stall, and the things that need to get done don't get done. And on the other side, where you're sacrificing the present for the future, you do what I call harms of action. So you're actively creating harmful situations by moving faster than your understanding should allow you to. Does any of that make sense? So starting to kind of feel like, oh, I see the framework here. So the reality is when we think the future feels uncertain, what I'd love to provoke for you is this idea that perhaps it isn't so much uncertain as it is undecided. You see that distinction? See how that's a little bit more like agency to you? You are a young generation of thinkers and doers and future leaders, and a lot of this is going to be possible for you to shape. And I very much want you to come into the roles of responsibility and influence that you all will have with a sense that you can make a difference. And this is how. So what I believe really matters next in all of what we're talking about is the ability to make good decisions, meaningful decisions, future-ready decisions. And I'm going to unpack that just a little bit. And of course, all of it's covered in my book, which I have 5 copies of here. And Youngmi will figure out how she's going to distribute those. We also have some bookmarks for those of you who just want to have a little reminder for put it on your wish list or whatever. But that's the book. Let's talk just a quick moment about why decision making is critical beyond this framing of how it helps us create the future. Because decision making in the context of business is something that's happening all the time. Leaders say they spend nearly 40% of their time making decisions, and the majority of them are saying they feel like that time is used poorly. That's kind of bad news, right? What are we doing? How is decision making shaping the world we're in? Well, what it's doing is navigating this tension between the immediate action we need to take and the delayed action, the harms of action and harms of inaction. But we don't have a framework for that. We don't necessarily have the tools we need to navigate that properly. So here's the tool I propose within this book, and the one that I'm just sharing with you here because I think it's this important. The key framework in this book is the now-next continuum. What I've done is taken, there's a number of models that use this concept within forecasting and foresights planning, strategic planning, that look at timelines, right? And it's just looking at from the past to the future through the present, right? And it's starting to say, well, how can we make sense of this? How can we kind of plot timelines so to be able to make better decisions? What I'm putting here is to say, in addition to just thinking about past to present to future, let's reframe that a little bit, because what the past actually is known. That's the known territory. There are things we know about the past. And if there's not, like if we're standing in the present and we're thinking about something we wish we did know about the past, it's usually knowable. Like we can run a report, we can do some research, we can read a book, we can look for the facts. What actually happened past, right? We can know those things. Meanwhile, when we're standing in the present and looking toward the future, what we're looking toward is that whole unknown, but yet possibly partly knowable and predictable because it is shaped by the actions and decisions we've already taken in the past and those we're about to make today, right? We've already determined that. We've already had that conversation. So as we stand here and look that way toward the future, what we need to be able to do is say, all right, what is it that's partly predictable? What could we know? What could we anticipate about this future? What are the questions we would need to ask in order to get a better sense of what's coming? What insights could we possibly glean from the gathering of partial answers to those questions? And how might we adapt? how might we change what we're doing to better suit how we think we need to move forward, given what we think is predictable. At the inflection point of all of this is this idea that when we're thinking about where business and technology meet and make decisions that serve human experiences, what we really want is for business objectives to be aligned with human outcomes, and then using technology to amplify that alignment as opposed to merely amplifying the business objectives. And that's where we need to be making the good decisions. We need to be making the good decisions about how to make sure this overlap is being met, how to make sure we're actually achieving this potential for good, meaningful human experiences that come naturally from the intersection of what a business is trying to achieve, what people in and outside of the business are trying to achieve, and how we're using technology to achieve that. And the reason why it's important to talk about business in this technology context is because I think we can all agree most of the technology experiences that you and I experience every day are driven by businesses, right? There's some business need that's propelling that. Like there's a reason why we're encountering it, and some business is behind it. So if we can think a step beyond that and think about who is the business, what is the business leader, or what is the business, who is the business leader that is making the decisions that are propelling those experiences, how could we then either influence that decision making, or if we're in the position of making those decisions, make better decisions ourselves? I also want to encourage you, as you think about reframing the way you think about the future, to use this concept of futures, plural, and not just future. And why that is because there are many possible ways that things can go all the time. And it leaves us an opportunity to feel less trapped in this sort of deterministic idea that everything is going to happen the way it's supposed to happen, and we don't have a chance to change that outcome. I want to give you an example of that. So Youngmi mentioned during my intro that I was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix. It was truly a very fun experience. I hope that all of you get to experience, if you haven't already, being part of a fast-growing company that succeeds and does really well, because it's a trip, it's fun. But when I was at Netflix, the story I want to tell you is that this was 99, 2000, 2001, very early on, and there was no sense that this was going to be the market leader in the industry, right? This was a tiny company in Los Gatos, California. Most people had not heard of. The only people who had heard of it were Californians living in the Bay Area, right? Like we were all kind of fanish about it because we knew it locally. There was a big 800-pound gorilla company that was dominating the video rental space. And I don't know if those of you are too young to remember what it was, but does anybody know what that company was? Blockbuster. There you go. Yeah. I worry about the day that I come into a room and then students are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, oh man, it's time to retire. But yes, Blockbuster was the dominant force in that industry. So it was like, what's this company going to do? Because this was the Netflix that I'm talking about, not this Netflix, right? This is early days. This is pre-glamorous like brand transition. But here's what I want to tell you. Reed Hastings, who was then the CEO, and the C-suite, the leaders of the company, made some decisions about allocating research and development funds and resources toward research toward what we were then calling set-top boxes, which was the predecessor to streaming as we now know it. But that was, like I said, 99, 2000, 2001. Roku didn't come along as a standalone set-top box until 2006. And Netflix didn't have a dedicated streaming plan until 2007. So that's, 6, 7 years of vision, of pure vision, where the company is not the leader in the space, is very much, I think a lot of people would have laughed to say, well, why are you developing plans for the technology that's going to replace your current technology when it's not even clear you're going to survive the next year? But that's the kind of vision that it takes to be able to look ahead, look into that what is partly predictable, ask the questions, look for the insights, and make the adaptations that you would need to be future ready. Does that concept of future readiness make a little more sense in that context? and the kind of decisions that you might have to make as you try to become this Netflix as opposed to the previous Netflix. Don't be intimidated by this diagram. It's a lot of different things happening at the same time, but I just want to show you that there's, as we think about, at the bottom, you can see that timeline model, the now, next continuum that I showed you before, the past, present, and future. Layered over top of that, there is the what mattered in the past, there is what matters now, and then looking all the way to the future, what is likely to matter, like set-top boxes and streaming. And then there's, if you pull it back one arrow, the what matters next, right? Like there's the, if streaming is going to be the dominant paradigm by which we watch movies, what would be the next action that we would need to take to move in that direction? That's how that thought process works. And what leads us there are these skills that are layered on top of here. And they're the skills of analytical thinking and of generative thinking. Now, when we hear the word generative these days, often we think about generative AI, which is fair. It's doing amazing things with generative thinking, but we are the originators of that generative thinking. So we have skills of creativity and of problem solving and of analysis and so on that all are very intuitive for us, that we can also cultivate actively. So the skills of analytical thinking are those learning, knowledge, and understanding. As we look at the past and look toward the future, what we're doing is collecting learning from the past. We are accruing that into knowledge through insights, through better analytical thinking, and forming a kind of understanding that's wisdom, that's ability to kind of pan around and look at the landscape and make better decisions as a result of what we have accrued through that analytical thinking. And simultaneously, what we're doing is pulling back almost from the future toward the present. As we think about imagination, think the farthest ahead we can and imagine what a future might look like. And then pull that back into a more active creativity, like how could we draw that, represent that? How can we make creative plans around it? And we meet that with this empathetic skill of generative thinking, of being able to say, how would this feel to people if they encountered this as an experience? How can we roll this all up into decision making? Well, I think I just did these slides all together. Sorry. What that might look like is making these wise decisions in a human-centered way from a lens of future readiness. And it comes back to this future versus future thinking, the ability to say, what is the future you most want to see happen? So here's another way to look at that. Again, don't be intimidated by the slide, there's a lot going on. But if we just take this one section of the now next continuum, the farthest, the partly predictable future, we think about all these different possible futures that cut through this, right? They're like these gray arrows. We think about what's a question we might ask, what's a scenario we want to try to anticipate, like what might you do for your job after you graduate or something like that? And you start thinking about possible outcome, possible outcome, possible outcome. Well, there is very likely a most probable outcome. You probably have a sense of a thing that's most likely to happen. Maybe you've been loosely offered a job, in an indeterminate way in some company, and that's always kind of waiting for you as a possibility. But maybe it's not the one you really want. Maybe the one you want, this preferred future, this preferred outcome is like your dream job, right? The thing you really wish would happen. And there's a gap right there. You can see that gap between the most probable and the most preferred outcome. You can see also this arrow between these, the actions and decisions. The question is, what do you have to do to close the gap between what the most probable outcome is and your most preferred outcome? What questions would you need to ask? What actions would you need to take? What insights would you need to have about the world, about the future, in order to make those closer together? Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? This, I genuinely tell you, as a consultant, I'm sharing with you what I call my $1 million question. If I just look at a company's situation and what they're most trying to solve and break it down to this, I can just about guarantee that I can add value in that situation, and so can you using this. What can you do to close the gap between the most probable outcome and your most preferred outcome? Please remember that. And that is going to be I think one of the most potent pieces of this future-ready decision-making that you can carry with you into the future. So again, remember, as we're thinking about this now next continuum, and I want to try to wrap this up so we can get to your questions. I see you percolating, I see you thinking about how this affects your life and your world. What I do want to point out is this harms of action and harms of inaction that we loosely talked about earlier. You can plot these on this continuum as well. As you think about people who are making decisions that they do not have the information for, that's actually over here. People making decisions too fast that they don't have the information for, like, hey, what happens if we roll out AI to control nuclear power, right? Like, oh, that could be something. We probably don't have all the information we need about that. And that is going to put us into the territory of increasing harms of action. You see how that makes sense? And then what about what we know that there's something that has to happen and we're not doing it? Like if we think about just about anything related to the climate crisis, right? Like there's an awful lot of things that need to happen in the realm of mitigation of climate catastrophe, like around rising sea levels, areas that are going to be flooded, around extreme weather alerts to make sure populations know when there's going to be hurricanes and things like that. Those are things we know we need to do, and every day we don't do them, we're creating additional harms of inaction. Does that make sense? It just as two examples. Not everything falls as extremely along those lines, but you can see how when you start to gather the learning, knowledge, and understanding, those skills of analytical thinking, you know where you are along that continuum. Do you have enough information to make this decision? Do you have enough information to know that there is an ethical imperative for you to make this decision and take action? Do you now need to actually pull back and use your skills of generative thinking to help you think about, with empathy, creativity, and imagination, what is going to keep you from making a wise decision? Are you going to be moving ahead of what you know and understand? Does this loosely make sense? I know it's a lot. That's why there's a whole book covering this, but does this generally make sense as a model? I see a lot of nodding heads. I'm taking that as encouragement. The other piece here, and I think a lot of you are working around technology or studying technology in various ways. You are probably familiar with the term digital transformation. You're probably familiar with innovation as a concept. This, in my experience over the last few decades, these are terms that we often use interchangeably with one another, and they're not the same at all. When you are catching up to whatever has already changed in the marketplace, that's more like transformation. You're trying to say, look, customers expect us, like think about during COVID, right? We all wanted to be able to order groceries or pick up food at restaurants. And those were things that some companies were already able to do. Like, you know, Starbucks had allowed us to do online ordering and mobile pickup for years prior to COVID. But not every company, not every food retailer had that. So all the other food retailers, all the other, you know, drink, like coffee shops and whatever, had to catch up. They had to digitally transform to make sure that they were competitive with the marketplace, that they were offering what customers expected of the marketplace. Innovation, on the other hand, is looking ahead of whatever the externalities are, of whatever the moment is, and saying, hey, should we maybe figure out how to build set-top boxes around streaming, because that seems like it's going to be the next thing. And how can we be sure that we're ready whenever that happens? You see how those are two different lenses? They're both important, and they both need to happen. In most organizations, they both need to happen at the same time, but they're not the same thing. And so I got that plotted along the now next continuum as well. So that's the question for organizations often is, what do you need to do to catch up? And what do you need to do to think ahead? But I would also say that this might be useful questions to ask yourself in your own career, your own education, your own thinking about your life. Are there things that maybe you feel like you need to catch up on? Is there, you know, maybe coursework that you feel like, I don't want to graduate without having done your graduates, but I don't want to get out of this program without having done a course in X, whatever it might be. Or I don't want to, miss out on the opportunity to learn about this thing. What do you need to do to think ahead? Can you think about, maybe it's the concentrations. Maybe it's thinking about what concentration would appropriately mix the skills needed to make sure that I'm future ready, that I'm ready for the most possible, the most excitement possible in my career, that I can do the most good and have the most fulfillment out of what I want to do with my life. I'm going to jump through some of this to the end here. I'm going to let you go there though. If you want, there's a QR code for this downloadable, this What Matters Next action plan. And if it's useful to you, feel free to grab that. And what it is going to do is ask you some questions that are just going to help you think about how you could, whatever situation you're trying to unpack, whatever sort of dilemma you're facing that you want to try to think about how you move forward in a more future-ready way. This will help you make those decisions. Everybody got it that wants to get it? Okay. All right, so remember, strategic optimism. We're not necessarily trying to be optimistic solely. We know we want to make a better future by being strategically optimistic. Like we know we need to be thinking about all the things we hope can happen, but all the things we think might go wrong, and so we need a plan. We need a plan to make sure that we keep the bad things from happening while we work actively toward the good things. So what kind of a future can you help create that is both strategic and optimistic? I think it's going to be a good one with you in it. And what decisions can you make about your lives, about your future, and about the collective future that will be part of Mattering Next? And I think that's going to be a fantastic contribution as well. I'm going to give you this slide one more time. Actually, yeah, it's not on that last slide. So if anybody wants to get information about the book to share with others, there's a QR code for that. And I'm going to say thank you very much and invite Young Mi up for some questions.
So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions and just to get started, but then open it up to the audience. And I think Kate wanted to share her book with students who ask interesting questions.
Yeah,
so tee up your questions, all right? So just to get started, because we're with a student audience now, can I ask what advice would you give to students for preparing for leadership roles that develop these kinds of skills that you've been talking about, so that they can evaluate and implement technology in human-friendly ways? Because right now we're just like in a mousetrap, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the pieces that I skipped over in the slides had to do with a learning and thinking style that are about insight and foresight-driven thinking. But I don't think we even need to see the slides to address that possibility. What I think needs to happen for all of us is that we need to be able to be a little more reflective with our thinking and use those analytical and generative skills to be really clear about the insights that we're using to make decisions. I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a tendency to be reactive in decision making, and sometimes we think that if we're in a pinched situation for time, if things are moving very fast, that we have no time to slow down and reflect and think more clearly. But the reality is we're rarely in a situation where we're under fire and we actually have an emergency and we have to go as fast as we possibly can. I talk in the book about an example where a friend of mine who was in the Navy talked about drills that they used to do where, as an officer, they would be down in the hold of the ship or whatever, and race upstairs, and at the top of the stairs, you're met with the railing, so you have to go right or left, and you don't know what you're going to confront. But if you go right, there might be somebody with a gun, there might be somebody, it's pantomime, and if you go left, there might be somebody who's holding like an image of a fire, and you just have to deal with whatever you find. And it's meant to train you to be able to be nimble and deal with, kind of face your fears and deal with whatever situation. And I give that example because I feel like we feel as if we're in that situation, but very few of us are actually in that situation from day to day. So if we slow ourselves down just a little bit and think and put these things in context, try to really think about the timeline, about the path, what is known, what is knowable, what is partly predictable, what kind of future are we trying to create? If we get into a disciplined habit of making decisions that way, I think we're going to all be a lot better off in the decisions we make around technology as well as in our lives.
And I think that some students have tech backgrounds, but other students do not. But even those students will want to step forward as leaders in this new world. So what do you think about what NVIDIA's Jensen Huang recently said about the usage of AI will pave the way for revenge of the liberal arts?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I'm a liberal arts student. I was my undergrad was I was a major in German, minor in Russian and linguistics, and a concentration in international studies, as I said, and then my grad work was in linguistics and language development. So I mean, you couldn't be more hardcore liberal arts than I was in my education. And then I spent 30 years in technology. But I think that so it resonates a lot with me, this idea Jensen Huang said of the sort of revenge of the liberal arts person, because you're doing this kind of holistic thinking. You know, you're approaching this just like we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes. You're taking a very integrative view of the world and of decision making. Technology is going to serve up faster and faster possible answers to questions. And we have to be the ones who have the wisdom, the human wisdom and the skill to counter those possible answers. So think about environments where, let's say you're working in a situation where you're approving or denying mortgages that people have applied for. And you've got algorithms that are doing all the crunching and the calculations, and the algorithms do a really, really good job of predicting who's going to default on their mortgage, who's going to be a good customer, who's going to, you know, just barely be able to pay, but then be a really good customer because they're paying the most in interest, whatever the calculations may be. So you have all this information. But now you also may be able to see information that says, of course, you're also excluding a certain population. You're ending up creating situations where you're unintentionally creating bias, or where you are not favoring, you know, women appliers as much as men appliers, or whatever the case may be. And now it's up to you to be the human in the loop, as it's called, human in the loop in these AI decisions, to be able to say, how do we counter what we know as a responsible way to lead in this situation? We can't just let, you know, an AI optimized situation lead us into a situation, or that's a very redundant way of saying, we can't just let AI lead us into a situation where we're optimizing sort of blindly and saying we don't care about the societal consequences we're wreaking by going this way. We don't care about the outcomes. We don't care about who gets left behind. That clearly cannot be the way we go forward. What actually seems like the way that AI empowers us is to be able to say, how could we use this in a way that integrates the best of what AI can tell us about the potential of the situation with what we holistically and wisely understand is the right way to lead society. We can differ on what the right way to lead society is. People will, you know, people with good intentions can still differ on that. But I think we can generally all agree that the way that pure mathematical thinking is going to lead us is probably not going to be the best way forward. We need to have some say in the matter. We need to have some lively debate. We need to have the ability to engage with one another and have some rhetorical conversation about this. That's where I think our liberal arts skills, our ability to read and understand the human condition, our ability to ask good questions of each other, listen, engage, dialogue with one another, that's going to come back and be incredibly important in these next years.
Great. So, anybody ready with a question from the audience?
I know you have some. I'm seeing you. See you all sitting there going, yeah, see?
Explain more about your book because I'm far away from tech.
What field are you in?
I'm in education and marketing at the moment. Yeah, so I was curious what I can learn.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, what's your name?
I can.
Igenum? Igenum was asking about the the implications of the book and the models in the book for education and marketing and these kinds of things. I think, you know, what's interesting to me is that education is one of the spaces that's most transformed by AI and emerging technology. And you all know this because you're actively in education, right? Like you were going through an education process. But I know because I am constantly engaged with educators, you know, in these kinds of situations, but also getting the opportunity to advise and speak at events like BET, which is an education technology conference in London. I spoke on behalf of Zoom at that conference, talking about the ways that education could be transformed by technology. But I think through that whole conversation, we are still trying to figure out what the best outcomes are, right? Like, what does it mean for students to have the best possible sort of personalized learning experiences? Is that the best way? Like, if we think about how AI might be able to offer up, you know, a different personalized experience for you than for you, and you know how that might work, we might see some potential there. Or is it more about the ability to kind of blend hybrid and in-person learning environments? You know, like it's going to be a combination of lots of different things. But I think perhaps one of the best examples in the education space is simply Duolingo. How many of you are familiar with Duolingo, the language learning app? Did anybody uses it? What's the highest streak we have in the room?
2 days.
2 days. That's great. Is there anybody over 1,000 with their streak? Yeah, all right. Are you over 2,000? No, okay. I'm at like 1,800. Yeah, we're up in the 1,500-1,800 range. I study a lot of languages, and if you aren't familiar with Duolingo, most of you seem like you're familiar with Duolingo. If you aren't familiar, besides being a language learning platform, what Duolingo has committed to doing is really being on the front lines of learning about education with AI. So they're experimenting with, of course, with gamification. That's what we all know that use the platform, you know, your daily streak, you know, the sort of rewards, the double XP points, you know, everything they know about how to bring you back and keep you learning through gamification. That's truly some useful learning for education as a whole. But what they've also been able to figure out is how to gently weave in AI throughout the curriculum and be able to figure out what words do I need to drill you on to make sure you remember them? Or what do I need to surface at this point in the lesson? Like you're going through and learning all these different lessons, but I see you routinely messing up this word. Let me interject and suggest you do a lightning round of, you know, flash review of this concept. If we take it beyond language and think about how could we all be learning anything with that kind of intervention? How could we be having systems that might actually be paying attention to what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well, and feeding us and serving us up the right learning at the right time so that we actually walk away with the most possible retention and the most possible transformation in our learning? That's the potential that I think a system like Duolingo really points to in the future. So does that seem like it's something of interest to you? Like you might go in the direction of thinking about interactive learning kind of education, or are you?
She already has an education business.
Oh, you do? Oh, I would like to hear about this.
Yeah, so definitely we do we do have our online platform where we have tutorials how to do that.
Oh,
Or if
perfect.
we implement technology in a good way, maybe it'll be more automated.
Yeah.
And it'll help to like real faster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really interested. I just don't know what to do, like because I'm not really knowledgeable.
That's great. Congratulations on having a business in the space already. And I think you'll find there's probably a lot of really interesting case studies out there to be found. If you haven't already found them, keep your eye out. There's just a lot of really interesting learning happening in that space. The education technology space is flourishing. So yeah, thank you for the question and the example. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Right?
That's
Great.
Okay, who's next?
Oh, I have a question. So we have seen a lot of the trends right now, and as you said before, Netflix, they're actually investing 7 years before they actually had the streaming. So I was wondering, from your perspective as individuals or companies, what are some ways they are doing that they can identify what trends are, kind of working, what trends are not?
That's a really good question. So if you didn't hear it, thinking about the example of Netflix being, sort of 7 years ahead of whatever happened in the marketplace and the trends that were taking place, what are some examples or how do companies think now about watching the trends and working with around that or innovation beyond that? I think there's a couple of things happening there. One is in the insights model that I have some slides to show. In fact, I'm gonna jump back and show you an example of what I'm talking about here. What happens with this model I'm proposing around insights and foresights thinking is you start with a really good question. And let's say that the question is, let's look at Apple and the wearable AR headset, right? If I'm Apple, if I'm Tim Cook, or Tim Apple as Trump would have it, if I'm Tim Cook and I believe that augmented reality has not seen its heyday, and truly I agree with Kate O'Neill, I agree with Tim Cook on this. Augmented reality has so much potential that we haven't seen the first clue of yet. But Tim knows that, Google Glass had its moment in the early 2010s and people called the wearers of them glass holes. And, we did not like that experience. Like everybody was not in agreement that it was the right time. So what has to happen in order to bring augmented reality to the masses? So if we're thinking about it and we go like, all right, what's our framing question? Is it the question like, what good could augmented reality do? We could start to gather some of the answers to that question. Like what good could augmented reality do? Can we think about that in the room? Like I could think about wayfinding, like you could find where you're going in the world on a map, like in a different way, right? It can give you a lot of really interesting pop-up nuance about the space you're navigating. Anyone else like healthcare medicine, maybe thinking about like doctors or surgeons, trying to perform a procedure and having some layered information that they might be able to use? Any other scenarios that you can think of? Education, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely education use cases. So we might be just gathering partial answers. You see that partial answer here at the second level. We're going to ask a question. We're going to gather up these partial answers. And when we start to pull those partial answers together, we might start to find some patterns to what we gather. We might go like, there's some tension between these. Or there's a commonality, there's a common theme. And the common theme maybe has to do with just-in-time information. Like the ability to surface information to you just at the moment when it's most useful to your context. That's interesting. So let's put that aside. That's an insight. An insight is now augmented reality might have the most utility and have the most value when it surfaces just-in-time information for that meets your context and your condition, like how you're in the world, right? Does that make sense? That would be where you would arrive? Then what you would want to do is look at the context and externalities and trends happening around you. You might go, all right, just-in-time information, let's see. There's a lot of issues around privacy right now. So how would we navigate a situation where we don't want to be intruding on people's privacy? We don't want to be taking pictures of people with the image, with the camera and the phone and the glasses. That would be an intrusion of privacy. There's a lot of issues around data tracking and location tracking. So we would need to solve for that. We would need to solve for all these different things, but we think that this just-in-time information is the key insight. There's going to be some context and some trends we need to track around that. But if we put our solutions hat on and go like, based on this insight and based on what we can understand about what's happening in the trend landscape and what seems to matter to people right now, we could come down here, and I don't know if you can read this, but it says timely, useful approaches and answers. So we need to make a decision today. What are we investing in? What are we putting resources to? What is our developer, John, over there in the research and development department, what are we going to have him working on today, tomorrow? That's the today answer. But guess what also happened? We also created, in the process of doing that work, this what I call a bankable foresight. We gave ourselves a clue about what might matter in the future. And we gave ourselves something to triangulate toward. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can make a decision that's for today, while also looking down the road and going like, all right, even though John might be working on dealing with these data privacy issues, let's assume that that's going to be solved at some point. We're going to have the ability, people are going to have the ability to block their image from being taken or something like that. Someday that's going to be solved. And so let's put it somewhere over here in the bankable foresight area. We're going to bring to market a device that's going to be able to serve up just-in-time context for wherever you are. It might not be the clearest example, but does that kind of make sense of how you would navigate that process? Does everybody get that? I know it's a little bit of a complicated eye chart of a map, but feel free to take an image, a picture of that if it's useful to you. This is how I would love to see more leaders making decisions, is going through this actual process of asking questions of their team, gathering up the partial answers, looking for insights, using those insights to then cut through what's happening in the context around them, the externalities, the trends happening in the landscape, what they know about trends. And we should all be collecting trends all the time that relate to our space. We should know what's trending, what important topics people are talking about, so that we can make those timely decisions and be able to do things in an abrupt, a quick way. We need to be able to be effective in that way, while also being very wise about what we know to set aside for later. And that gives us the ability to sort of put a through line in place, through line thinking, like I was talking about earlier. Does that help? Does that make sense? Cool. Everybody else make some sense of that? I know it's a lot.
That's one of the great models in the book, and there are more, so I'm going to.
Yay.
I know you mentioned. But first, before we go to you, were there any, okay, so take it away.
Okay, I was interested in the differences, the gap between the preferred or like the probable outcome and the preferred outcome.
Yeah.
What are some of the common practices that you've done, and aside from learning from others' experience, what are some of the common practices you've done to help seek ways that could close in the gap and ways that you could harness that value in between these differences?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So in the preferred versus probable outcomes, the real power is in this model. So applying this model and saying, all right, we think that what we'd love to see happen is for Netflix to become the dominant streaming provider someday down the road. And the most probable outcome is that Blockbuster continues to win and beats us and we die as a company. So let's close the gap on that, right? And the way to go about that is not to say we're gonna shoot the wad and go whole hog all at once and let's put all our money into streaming. We can't do that. We have to win today's battle first. Today's battle is we have to become the dominant DVD rental platform and be sort of incrementally working toward being ready for the streaming platform when that problem arrives, when that arrives and customers are ready for it. So there's a staging, right? It's an ability to say we can recognize what the gap is, and then we can kind of turn it on its side and say this is a timeline. We need to be able to say here's what we know, here's what we need to ask, here's the insights we need to gather, and the foresight we can put over here that becomes the timeline we're working toward. Does that make sense? Does that make sense for others in the room? Kind of getting how that falls together? Okay, we're tapping watches and looking at time.
So we have, I think we have a few more minutes if folks have more questions.
I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
So, go
Yeah.
ahead. Thank you.
My question is, almost following up Tim's question, in terms of closing the gap, in terms of what the probable outcome is and the preferred, how would you navigate a situation where, say, let's take Korea as an example, where you maybe not 100% sure in terms of what the preferred outcome would look like, but you know how you would want to feel in that position? How do you navigate decision-making in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I imagine that resonates with everyone in the room, right? There are going to be plenty of decisions that you face where you don't have all the facts that you would love to have at your disposal, but you have a sense of some subjective things, right? Like I know that I would love to feel more like I'm empowered. I would love to be, I'd like to be in a city, but I don't know which city. Or I'd like to, there's a lot of really vague sorts of things that we can usually gather up, but they don't point us in a very concrete direction, right? What we need to be able to do is still make inventory of those things and still mine them for what insights there possibly are in those. So, kind of going through this process and really kind of asking ourselves to follow this disciplined routine of saying, look, what does it tell me that I'm saying I'd like to be in a city, for example, like in that hypothetical example. And for me, that might be, well, what I mean by I'd like to be in a city is, I think what I'd like to be is around a lot of people who are doing high impact things where I can be inspired by the vibrancy of the culture and the community and get ideas and be able to be in network with other people who are high performers and high achievers. Okay, so that's an insight. Like I know that about myself. And that helps me cut through a lot of the questioning and the insights process in the future to be able to use that as a shortcut to future decision making. So the process is just go through this model, ask yourself these questions, and gather up those partial answers and look for insights as much as possible. And truly, I advise keeping an insights inventory. So an actual list of actual insights that you have and understand about yourself and the world around you, so that as you refresh and renew those and review those every so often, they help you make better decisions and they help you make faster decisions. And you feel more confident in your decision making and you're navigating yourself toward these best possible outcomes. And you're doing it in a way that sets you up much more likely for that future you would like to see happen. Does that make sense? Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all.